You're listening to The Weather Junkies.
Oh boy. Large wedge tornado coming up into Tuscaloosa. A winter storm warning is in effect for our area.
The snow is expected at least another 2 to 4 inches overnight. Then that snow is
The National Weather Service in Huntsville has issued a tornado warning for northwestern Massachusetts.
14 to 22 inches of snow!
Good Thursday evening, Wednesday evening. We're on a special night here on the Weather Junkies. This is episode 37. Hard to believe that we're on episode 37, but it is now getting to be late August 24th. I'm joining the show here in Connecticut, Tyler Jankowski with Dakota in Colorado on this Wednesday night, a special night. Dakota?
Hey Tyler, and hey everyone, thanks for listening tonight. Yeah, sorry we're on a special night. I couldn't do the show tomorrow night. We have the new student picnic for the Atmospheric Science Department here at CSU, so I have to give a little talk there. So thanks for joining us tonight on a special Wednesday night. The weather here in Colorado is actually kind of weird for Colorado. It's pretty dreary. Cloudy all day, some rain off and on, and I love it because, we don't get much of this weather out here, and it's good for the grass, good for the crops. We actually officially went into a drought last week, according to the drought monitor, went into a moderate drought. So yeah, it's always nice to see rain out in Colorado. How is the weather in Bristol?
Well, I just got here last night, so I'll talk about the weather in Williamsport, where I was starting on Saturday. The weather at the Little League World Series was humid and wet to begin. There was an inch and a half of rain on Sunday, and then that front cleared, and it was gorgeous. It was actually chilly at night starting on Monday with completely blue sky, and of course the forest is still very lush in beautiful Lycoming County, Pennsylvania. So that's the best type of weather, when the humidity goes away and you still have everything green, you still have everything in summer mode, but it won't last much longer.
Yeah, that's how I'm kind of feeling here. I believe there were a few trees up in the higher elevations that are already starting to turn, and then we had some snow at higher elevations, probably higher than 12,000 feet, 11,000 feet. So yeah, fall's right around the corner, summer coming to an end. And tonight we're joined by Mike Mogil, who is out in Naples, Florida right now. And how's the weather down there, Mike?
Hot and humid. It's Florida. It's summer.
Yeah, stupid question, huh?
Lots of thunderstorms. Had some more today. I think we've had rain almost every day this month, save 2 so far.
Yeah, gotcha. You're actually the second guest to come on from Florida this summer. We had on Eric Blake from the National Hurricane Center, and yeah, that's basically the same thing he told me when I asked him how the weather was down there. So same old Florida, I guess. And we're gonna get to Mike, the discussion with Mike in a minute here. But first, let's get to the tweets of the week. And Tyler, you want to go ahead and start that off?
Yeah, we should have taken Mike's weather into the future. What's the weather going to be like early next week?
Probably wetter than it is now.
That's a good answer. We can leave it at that. Our first tweet of the week is mesocyclone tracking, and the tweet is by Larissa. She says that she is a weather weenie obsessed with tornadoes and meteorology PhD candidate and teaching assistant at the University of Oklahoma. And the tweet is, I believe it's a radar loop, and she says my mesocyclone tracking algorithm is working pretty well. I guess the black line as it moves along is where the rotation track is.
Yeah, I think that's the gist of it. I believe I've seen products like these before, and it's always cool to see how different people visualize it and what I'm curious to know what her algorithm is for getting those. I'm assuming it's some sort of rotation measurement, and then that'll put down that line and track it. I also think it's really cool when you get different mesocyclones developing, and you get lines crossing. You can see where one place had 2 or 3 mesocyclones cross over in the same day. So just wanted to give her a shout out for how cool her work is.
Yeah, the handle is at RissaRWX, and I believe we put the link in the YouTube video. But yeah, fascinating little line there. I think WSI has a Shear Tracks product, but it's kind of slow to update, and this is very cool. Yeah, nice tweet.
Yeah, so on to our next tweet. This is from Eric Holthouse, and he writes for Slate, but this tweet was actually one of his pieces for 538. I hadn't seen him write for 538 in the past, so this must be his first one. The tweet says, "Here's how meteorologists handle days like this when a weather model predicts catastrophe." And within the article, he compares the election forecast from 538 to ensemble forecasts. And then he talks about some of the things we're seeing right now with Invest 99L, and this was written at one point where the euro had an extreme forecast, and the GFS not so much. I actually haven't seen the latest slew of model output, but I think they're starting to come to a better solution. This article is good. There's some really good stuff in it. I don't know about the title. The title was Hurricane Hermine doesn't exist yet, but experts are starting to worry. While that may be true, I don't think anyone is pushing the panic button quite yet. Although that may change in the next few days. Mike, I'm assuming you're following this pretty closely as you may be impacted by it yourself.
This is the one that's
what do you think about this?
By the Lesser Antilles right now?
Yeah. There you go. I like that. Yeah.
I'm not excited.
Yeah. Well, it's gotten a lot of buzz on social media, so I haven't been tracking it that much just because I've seen more, I think, in one day about Gaston because it has a name and everyone was freaking out about the Beauty and the Beast references.
My take on that 99L is that I'm more worried about it bringing copious rains. Some places in Florida are already pushing 50 inches so far this year, and they don't need another 8 to 10 inches of rain on top of that.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, we'll keep an eye on it. We may have an update next week. We might actually have a special episode next week on the tropical weather if something starts to develop.
I'll be happy to be the guy at the beach in case Jim Cantori's not in town.
Yeah, let's go on to our next tweet. We could talk about the tropics all day, but something that kind of caught some meteorologists and some of the public off guard with the tornadoes today, and that's summarized very good in this tweet from Tony Liza. He tweeted, "We know nothing, #Indiana weather, #Ohio weather." And I don't think the forecasts were great for this. The SPC had a slight risk, but already today we've had a slew of tornado reports. At least I'm looking at the Storm Prediction Center right now. I believe it's up to 39 tornado reports for parts of northern Indiana and northern Ohio. So yeah, normally when you see something like that, it had more than a slight risk of severe weather. Tyler, you've been following this, I assume, because you're a severe weather guy. What do you think about this?
Well, I kind of followed it for 3 hours, and there was a lot of debris signatures in that window, and I usually like to tweet whenever I see one, but there was definitely, the one that stood out to me was the one in Kokomo, probably at least a strong tornado. I saw a 3D cross-section of the debris signature on correlation coefficient, and I know it's not a perfect connection, but there are a lot of links between the debris height and how strong the tornado might be. But I mean, we've even seen pictures of the damage. You saw that. I'm sure you saw that picture of the Starbucks that was leveled.
Yeah, I think I saw like a dozen pictures of Starbucks leveled.
So I'm not too familiar with the forecast leading up to it because I was disconnected the last couple days, but there didn't seem to be a lot of buzz on social media. Like I kind of like those events where you don't have the unnecessary hype and then the weather just happens. It's kind of refreshing sometimes.
For people looking from the outside in,
Oh yeah, obviously, but
people there probably didn't really know what was coming until they got the tornado warning.
I will say though that I saw a couple of warnings that did say the tornado was radar confirmed, which is refreshing to see because a lot of times that still doesn't happen nowadays, even after it is radar confirmed.
Yeah. And we have another tweet here on the similar lines, and it's just a radar image of, I guess it's a radar loop of what happened. It's from Danielle Dozer, and basically it's just the velocities, and you can see the couplet in a GIF here going through Kokomo, and it's a pretty tight couplet, and I believe at this point there was a fairly strong tornado going through the area, and that produced all the damage images.
The debris and or I should say the CC and the differential reflectivity were far more impressive than this velocity scan. I mean, this is like run-of-the-mill couplet, but the debris was a big debris signature, and it was the ZDR was near zero, so the debris was tumbling. I mean, it was just a textbook debris signature, so I was more impressed by that.
Yeah.
Well,
Hopefully, I think it's. Go ahead, Mike.
I'm down here in Florida watching from a distance, but I've got the SPC storm plot up on my screen, and I'm looking at it, and there's like 2 or 3 tracks that jump out on that, and I'm suspecting that a lot of these 35 reports, or however many reports there are multiple sightings of the same tornado. The one that destroyed the Starbucks is listed in the listing of storm reports twice. So I suspect there's some multiplicity in here, but it looks like a pretty concentrated, small area that we're dealing with here, from about Indianapolis up towards Northwest Ohio. I suspect when the dust settles, no pun intended, we're probably going to have a lot less than 35 tornadoes today.
Yeah, that's a good point. And even if it's, a dozen tornadoes or 10 tornadoes, it's probably a handful of mesocyclones that produce them, just picking up the tornado and redropping in the funnel.
Yeah, not to downplay what's going on, because in addition to the actual tornado damage, I don't know if you saw it on TV, but something with power lines or lightning or something set a bus shelter area apart, and there's like half a dozen or more buses that have been burned completely.
Wow.
Yeah, I think the intensity of the tornadoes, I think what caught people most off guard, some of the long-lived, you can't really speculate on EF number, but there are a lot of reports of wedges, and some of them look pretty valid too, and I think that caught people off guard.
Yeah, no, it's obviously a pretty significant outbreak, even if it's only a dozen or so storms when they've done counting them, and it's pretty concentrated and pretty significant for August 24th.
Yeah, meanwhile, everyone was talking about a storm that didn't exist yet. So it's kind of funny how the way thing works on social media. That's going to do it for our tweets this week. And so let's get right into our main discussion with Mike Mogil here. Just to give Mike a brief intro, he earned his bachelor's and master's in meteorology from Florida State. He holds the American Meteorological Certified Consulting Meteorologist and Certified Broadcast Meteorologist ratings. He also has the National Weather Association Digital Media Seal. He's practiced meteorology for over 40 years. He worked at the National Weather Service. He worked as a forensic meteorologist off and on. And he started a few companies, including MathWorks Tutoring, How the Weather Works, and he's done a lot in education. It's actually how I met Mike. He's the director for the National Weather Camp program and has facilitated countless weather camps for all ages. And so that's why tonight the episode is titled "Being a Swiss Army Knife Meteorologist" with Mike Mogil, because you're kind of the jack of all trades here. You forecasted for a long time, and you do education. You have a few companies. You even wrote a book. So Mike, thanks for joining us. And I guess just off the bat, how did you get into atmospheric science and meteorology from a kid into college and where you are now?
Well, I've actually asked a lot of people the same question, and there's really like 3 tracks that people get into. They've either had the, quote, weather experience when they were growing up. Back in the early 70s, it was, of course, the people that would rather be a meteorologist or a weather officer than shoot in the jungles of Vietnam. And today, it's the people that watch the Weather Channel and listen to Weather Junkies.
Yeah, I think most of our guests have been the latter of that. People who just, got obsessed with winter storms or severe storms and
so
on the 8s and
so my scenario is I grew up in New York City, and contrary to all of the reports a couple of years ago when Irene and Sandy came up the Jersey coast and hit New York, and hurricanes don't strike New York. Well, when I grew up in the mid-50s, hurricanes struck New York and Long Island frequently. And I had 2 of them blow by where I lived, and everything is flying around, sort of like the cows in Twister. My nose pressed against the clearly non-wind resistant windows, just watching everything happen, and I just turned to my parents and said, I'm going to be a meteorologist. And they, of course, were dismayed, and the rest is history.
Yeah, that's awesome. Where exactly did you grow up in New York City?
I was born in Manhattan, lived in the Bronx, Manhattan, Queens, moved out to Long Island, Suffolk County, the eastern part of the island, and then went off to school, and never returned to New York to live. I've just been living all across the country, not quite like a vagabond, but moving around to different places with the National Weather Service, and finally wound up here in Florida and loving it.
Did you live in a time in Islip at all?
I did.
Okay, so I'm going down that track because one of our really good friends from college, Paul Svensson, we had him on the show. I think you guys ended up talking at one of the AMS conferences and found out you lived like in the same few blocks of houses.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, so just a funny anecdote there.
Oh, yeah.
And so tell us what you're doing right now. I know there's a handful of things, but just kind of a quick recap of what you're working on right now.
It's a big handful of things. No, seriously. I'm obviously doing forensics. I'm working on a bunch of legal cases right now. And that really runs the gamut from everything from, traffic accidents that may involve wet roadways or blinding light or something like that, to incidents where winds may or may not have destroyed part of a roof and the insurance company questions it, and you've got to bring a forensic meteorologist in there to attest to whether or not there were winds present and whether they were strong enough to produce damage. And then as a meteorologist, you have to talk to an engineer who's probably going to render the final decision on whether or not the winds actually did do the damage or not. So there's a lot of cross-fertilization here. The meteorologist deals with the weather, the engineer deals with the structure, and you'll have to talk to each other. So lots of scenarios. I guess I'm working about 6 cases right now. So I'm doing that. I'm writing for Global Weather and Climate Center, which we talked about a couple months ago when I passed through Colorado, and we had nice lunch together, Dakota. And just bringing along some more writers on board to help us cover the weather and climate, not just in the United States, but around the world. And I guess if any of your listeners want to write for Global Weather and Climate Center, they can clearly reach me through you, or if you're popping up my address or something on the the final product here, that would be great. No money for this, but lots of good experience and a lot of good work with some people that are pretty credible writers. Have written a bunch of books. Have a couple more in process. I've actually worked with Robert Hoffman, who's a psychology professor down at the University of West Florida, and a bunch of people in NOAA. And we have a book going to MIT Press, which is going to be a pretty credible book, and it's going to deal with how meteorologists forecast. So that's another thing that I've been working on. Then, of course, you mentioned my tutoring business. My wife and I run a tutoring center in Naples, Florida. We tutor everything from first graders on up to adults, and we primarily do math. It's called MathWorks Tutoring. To keep it distinguished from MathWorks, the company in Massachusetts that does software that they use at universities, we focus on the tutoring piece. And we have about 15 tutors that work for us, and we have been in school down here for 2 weeks, and we are already almost oversubscribed. So that's how much tutoring is going on. We're getting ready to launch an online tutoring component to what we do down here, which means we'll be able to tutor students anywhere, and I'll be able to have tutors anywhere that can help tutor people anywhere. So that's the next thing on our agenda. We do run the weather camp program. We just finished a cool program down here in Naples this summer, and we actually finally got good press coverage locally. They came out and did a whole big spread on us in the Naples newspaper, and the kids just performed admirably, and we actually built and launched hot air balloons, and they flew pretty long distances. And we talked about buoyancy and wind flow and things like that in terms of building them. And when the winds picked up too much, we had to scrub the launches. So it was everything that you would expect for an aviation focused thing, and the kids got to experience it firsthand. Those were middle school kids.
Yeah.
I still love taking photographs, just like the nice thunderstorm that you're showing on Weather Junkies here. And the other night we had one of the most spectacular, brilliant red-orange sunsets I've ever seen. So that was worth another 20 to 30 photographs. And every now and then I get a few hours sleep.
Is that it? Is that all?
That's about it.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about the forensic stuff. One time you had, it was after I went to one of your weather camps, and I got this phone call, or it was probably an email actually from you that said, hey, I need snow samples from Maryland. It was right after we got a total of 40 to 50 inches in the span of a week in the Maryland, D.C. area. And you needed snow samples from these marinas because you're working on someone was working on a case about roofs and snow, and so I went out. I traveled. You gave me a stipend. You said, hey, I'll pay you to do this, and I went out and got core samples of snow because I think you were interested in the water equivalent of the snow. And that was just awesome. That was so cool for me to do. I felt like I was on a CSI team or something.
You were.
So
you were on a CSI team.
Yeah, I guess I was. Yeah, technically. Yeah. So what kind of cases, what kind of cases specifically have you worked on? If you can talk about it, what's some of the work you do there?
All right, I can do that. Well, first of all, the case that you mentioned was significant because I'm in Florida, and getting snow core samples up in Maryland would have been tough, even if I could get up there, with the attorney footing the bill for my travel. The snow would have settled, it would have melted some by the time I got up there, and I wouldn't have had a representative, amount of liquid water content, and that was the concern because the snow accumulated on roofs, and it accumulated on the tops of the docks, and some of the boathouses, the ones that are just like tin roofs and stuff like that, did overload, and they did collapse, and then they landed on boats, and the boats sank. And so there were cases involved, whether or not it was an insurance claim or whether it was negligence on the part of the marina. And so I had to go give them some idea of what the snow loading was.
And did anything ever come out of that, or?
Well, they never. Sometimes the attorneys never tell you how the cases turn out.
Okay, gotcha.
Oh, excuse me.
Well, that
But
was
as long as they send me a check, that's good. But I do like to know sometimes how these turn out. But sometimes they just don't want you to know.
Yeah.
But I want to share the story with your listeners and viewers of the first case I did. And I'm going to tell everyone that I'm attributing my career in forensic meteorology to O.J. Simpson.
All right, here we go. This is gonna be good.
And here's the storyline. It was about a year after the O.J. Simpson trial, and I got I lived in the D.C. area at the time, and I get a frantic phone call from a public defender in D.C. that she needs a meteorologist for a Fourth Amendment case. And I paused and said, you need a meteorologist for a Fourth Amendment case. That's undue search and seizure, right? She said, that's correct. And I said, well, this doesn't make any sense. Meteorologists don't do that stuff. She said, well, let me tell you about the case. It turns out that a D.C. resident was approached by the D.C. police for allegedly having been dealing with drugs on the street, and the police had seen the drug deals going down, and they approached him, searched him, found that he had a small quantity of drugs on him, and they busted him. And the attorney said, wait a minute. The police said they observed the drug deal going down from a place that they were watching from a second floor window in a nearby house. And she says, I remember the night in question. It was foggy. There's no way they could have seen what was going on the street.
Whoa.
Well, the police report was filled out and said the weather was clear. So I went and did the research on the weather conditions and found out that not only was it foggy, it was pea soup foggy. So they couldn't have even seen the street, let alone people on the street doing any type of transactions. Yeah. And we went to trial on 3 separate occasions, and the police never showed up. And the case was thrown out. And the police basically did a bad job of what they were doing, and it was a Fourth Amendment case, and it was that case that got me started on doing forensics. I wasn't planning on doing forensics. I didn't have my shingle out there. I did have my certified consulting meteorologist, but that case triggered me into going into forensics, and I've done over 120 cases since then, and every case has its own wrinkles. Sometimes you get what you think are realistic judgments and settlements and negotiations, and sometimes you get broadsided and things go against you on a technicality. But I would say out of 120 cases, probably helped my attorneys and clients win about 90%, and that's both on plaintiff and defendant sides. So not a bad percentage, but every one of these cases requires a lot of detailed work, a lot of reconstruction of weather events, because they rarely happen where there's weather data. They only happen in between. And so you have to put the pieces together and make sense of what happened at a particular date and time and place, and present it in such a way that the attorneys, the judge, the juries, whatever, understand what you're doing. So you have to have good communication skills, and you have to be able to produce some credible and understandable graphics that the folks can understand. So it's more than just being a weather reporter or doing a detailed mesoscale analysis or something. It's really putting everything together in full communication mode to make sure that you tell everybody what's going on in a way they can understand it.
Yeah, you gotta have the full package for that, and I've discovered that a lot of jobs have become kind of like that. Even as a grad student, you could do really good research, but if you can't communicate it to your committee or people at a conference, then it's tough. And segue here, I kind of grasped onto that idea at one of your weather camps. I went to the Howard Weather Camp in D.C. at Howard University. I think it was 2009, summer of 2009. I went there, and I'll never forget. I got a phone call from you. I think I was just waking up or something. And my mom's like, "Mike's on the phone." I'm like, "Who's Mike?" I didn't really know what was going on, and I ended up talking to you, and you say, "Welcome to Weather Camp," and you tell me your name and tell me all about it, and I'm way excited, over the moon about it. And then we hang up. I look down at the floor, and I see this book, and I'm like, the author of that book is the person I just talked to on the phone, and that blew my mind because I had bought the book before and had no idea who I was talking to. So I thought I'd share that story because I won't forget that. And then I went on to go to the weather camp, and it really put me on the right path and a really awesome path in meteorology. So I'm just curious. I kind of know, but for our listeners, what are some of the weather camps you do, and for what ages and what kind of activities do you do?
Well, before we segue to that, though, I just want to throw two things out. First of all, I want you to know that I put my pants on like everybody else. So I'm not holier than thou just because I've published books or anything like that. I'm down-to-earth type stuff, and I keep my head reasonably small to fit my body size. But the other thing is that a tip of the hat has to go to Dr. Bill Bonner, who used to be president of the AMS. He was director of the Weather Service. He was my first boss when I came to the National Weather Service. And he took me on the side and one day after I had done a trip report, and he said, "Thanks for the trip report." I was the new kid on the block. I'd only been there like a month and a half. And he said, "Thank you for the trip report. I really appreciate it. But did anybody ever tell you you don't know how to write?" And I looked at him and said, "No, sir." And he said, "Good, go to this writing class." And he gave me a piece of paper, and it was, one of these 3-day writing seminars that they, have all over D.C., and he sent me to that. Government paid for it. Transformed my communication skills in writing. And then a bunch of colleagues at the National Weather Service asked me to join Toastmasters, which is a speaking group, and you get to do speeches and talks before your peers, and your peers evaluate you. And I learned so much about speaking from that organization that those two things totally transformed my communication skills. And there's no way I would be talking intelligently here with you or writing an article for GWCC if he didn't send me to that writing class and my colleagues didn't bring me into the Toastmasters program. So anybody doing anything these days has to be able to communicate, and Dr. Bill Bonner was the consummate person, PhD, manager and so forth, who said scientists do a rotten job of communication, and I'm going to do something about it. And he started with me, and I'm his testimony, and I would spread that gospel everywhere I go, and that's the reason in weather camps we put so much attention on communication.
Yeah, you made us do a presentation at the end of it, and that you put the emphasis on, you got to really do the groundwork for the research aspect of it, but you have to make sure that you're communicating effectively and you have good graphics and you don't say all the time or like all the time. So
that's right. No, the other thing though about weather camps, and I'm going to segue right into it now per your question, is the game plan for weather camps, and there's about 15 of them around the country. I don't teach at all of them. I actually only teach at the one here in South Florida right now, but I do everything that I can to make sure that kids and others know about the weather camps. We're going to be updating our webpage. We're going to put all the information for the camps around the country on the www.weatherworks.com website so that people can go to an interactive map, click on a camp, get the contact information, and find out about the camp. Camps are either for middle school or high school kids. finding out that most of the camps are geared to high school. I wish there were more middle school camps because the middle school kids are crazy about weather and they don't get enough in school. So we focused on a middle school camp here in Naples, and it was really great. But the camps are all around the country. Most of them are done at universities. The one we did here in Florida was working with 4-H, so we worked with the 4-H folks. The one at Oklahoma is done at OU. The one in Nebraska is done at University of Nebraska-Lincoln. There's a camp at the University of Wisconsin. So there's camps all over the place, except there's not a lot of camps west of the Great Plains, except there is a camp in Arizona in Phoenix linked to one of the science museums down there. So there's about 15 camps. We try to, spark the interest of the kids. If they're very interested in weather, we want to keep that interest going. And if they find out that weather's not for them, they find out that they really don't like weather after all, then we've done a service as well, because they don't spend 3 or 4 years at college and then decide they want to go to a different major. So whether they're gung-ho about it or whether we weed out kids that, can't do the weather, the camps have been very successful, very positive results. The kids love it. The parents love it. You loved it. And we've had numbers of meteorologists who said, wish I had camps when I grew up. I didn't have weather camps. So we know that it's the right thing to do for the kids, and wish there was more way to get better weather information into the school curriculum so the kids could do more weather, but that's a political battle, and tough to accomplish that, especially nationwide. But the camps are fun. Love them. They're a lot of work, but the response of the kids makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah, I learned a ton of science, about meteorology at the camp, and then I learned a lot about communication, and then the final thing that was super valuable to me was learning that it's important to have a network around you of people in your community, whether it's a mentor, whether it's just someone you exchange emails with. And I remember meeting Ken Carey at the weather camp, and at the time he worked for Nobilis. Now he's at ERT, I believe.
That is correct.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, look at this big wig. I have to go talk to him because Mike said you have to talk to people and shake hands and make eye contact. And I went and did it, and now I see Ken at every AMS conference, and we usually have a nice conversation about something. And that's where I learned, having a network is important, and the weather community is so tight knit that it's not hard to have a network.
No, and the network doesn't have to be face to face. Now you could do it on Skype or Google Hangouts, or a telephone call, or even a bunch of emails to just be connected to people, or Facebook or the social media. But you want to be in touch with people and interact, and not just be there and interact, but you want to be able to do things with some of these people as appropriate, and you definitely want to bring people along. And I have to tell you that I'm mentoring one person now, but I suspect I'm going to be mentoring about 4 or 5 people before too long, because a bunch of folks have started now querying whether or not they could do research projects under my wings. And so I've got at least one gal at the University of Maryland working on a snow research project, and we're coordinating with her advisor at the college, and she's coordinating with me as well. And it's an interesting joint project to get her through her research methods class. And I've already worked with Matt Bolton, that, and Matt's done an incredible amount of work on hurricane research, as has Matt Capucci, who is one of my interns who's up at, I believe it's Harvard now, working on his undergraduate. And I gave him an interesting research topic on hurricanes. Matt Bolton did lots of things on global hurricane numbers and stuff, and what we found out was that the number of hurricanes globally hasn't changed much over 65 years. It goes up, down, up, down, up, down, but it definitely doesn't show the variability that we see in the Atlantic. And most people jump on the Atlantic as the proxy for global hurricane numbers. You know, if the Atlantic is busy, then the whole world is busy. And it doesn't work that way. When the Atlantic's busy, the Eastern Pacific is on vacation and things like that. So the numbers globally don't change much. But what we found is that in the Eastern Pacific, the duration of storms in the Eastern Pacific is actually going down. The strength of storms is actually going down. And this is all contrary to some of the initial thoughts in the first IPCC report that was a warning of global catastrophe from hurricanes. So we're not sure why the numbers are doing what it is. Obviously, there's a lot of fluctuations with oceanic cycles and oscillations and El Nino and La Nina and stuff like that. But when you start looking at the numbers over a long period of time, there's trend lines that are saying something is going on, that these storms are not responding to the perceived increase in ocean temperatures. We're not getting stronger and stronger storms and more storms and longer duration storms. We're not seeing that. And I don't know what all that means yet. All I know is that the numbers are telling us that hurricanes are not going to be the proxy that they were originally thought to be as a measure of climate change. But when it came to Matt Capucci, I gave him a different problem. My wife commented one day that she thought hurricanes tended to strike land closer to high tide.
Yeah.
And I said I hadn't noticed that, but she obviously was paying attention, so she gets wife points for that. And so I asked Matt Capucci to determine whether hurricanes were smarter than a fifth grader and could, decide that they're going to strike closer to high tide. Don't know why, but the data actually supports at a 90% confidence level that the hurricanes do indeed make landfall closer to high tide than low tide. So that's pretty significant. And we did about 46 landfalling hurricanes in the United States, and it ran all the way from New England down to the Gulf Coast. And we just did U.S., but it was definitely closer to high tide than low tide.
Wow.
So that's some of the stuff that I'm doing with follow-ons to weather camps and internships and doing some research, and there'll be more.
Yeah, that's cool to see that after weather camp you work with some of the students even further.
I'm working with you right now. Look out.
Speaking of climate change, can you tell us a little bit more about the Global Weather and Climate Center that you are part of?
Yes, I definitely can. Jordan Rabinowitz, who's a master's degree candidate at the University of Missouri in Columbia, he started a website a couple of years ago and then bumped into me at a National Weather Association conference and said, don't you want to collaborate and help us take this website to new levels? And so we revamped, we had lots of discussions, we revamped the focus of the website and generated the Global Weather and Climate Center. And the framework of this site is not to report current weather information like the TV meteorologist and the National Weather Service, because there's plenty of people that are doing that. We don't need to replicate it. And we decided our focus would be on taking weather stories, whatever they might be, and wherever they might be, and the operative word here is global, and we would explain about what happened. So, for example, if we were to go into today's tornado outbreak in Indiana and Ohio, we might take a look at some things and do a little mini post-mortem and talk about what may have contributed to the evolution of the event. And sometimes we see an interesting cloud formation. We explain what happened and why the cloud looks like it does or formed like it did. I was out in Hawaii a couple of weeks ago when Darby came by, Tropical Storm Darby, very, very weak, passed by the island of Oahu, which is where Honolulu is. nothing much happened. And then as the storm was leaving, a lagging rain band moved in from the south and sat over Honolulu for 3.5 hours and dumped 10 inches of rain. And the street in front of our hotel was flooded. Our restaurant was flooded. We got to go to a different restaurant. There were mudslides nearby. Interstate Highway 1 had water deep enough that cars were floating in it. And we had 6 separate thunderstorms go over Honolulu that evening because they were training. Honolulu doesn't get many thunderstorms in a year. Maybe they get a half.
Yeah.
And so we had 6 in one night. And this was a dinky little rain band that just came in and sat. And Darby was moving away from Honolulu and Oahu. So I wrote a story about it. Because I was there, I experienced it, and my vacation was impacted by it, at least for a night. And then the next day was beautiful, just like Honolulu should be. But why did it happen? What happened that night? How did that train echo set up and do what it did? And what were some of the impacts? And that became the weather story. So that's the type of stuff we do. One of our writers, one of our new writers, is putting together a story tonight about the tornado that hit in Massachusetts over the weekend, and she's already interviewed 2 people in the National Weather Service up in New England and included their information in her story on this thing, and it's going to be another post-mortem of what happened and where the tornadoes, how they developed and what the meteorological parameters were. So a lot of education component at GWCC, a lot of geography because we're doing global, and there'll be a lot of information about weather safety at all different levels because the GWCC site, the Global Weather and Climate Center site, is a Weather Ready Nation partner. We did that early on because we knew we were going to be helping people understand what to do in the event of hazards.
So you've obviously had a very long and storied career. What would you say has been your favorite thing over the last several decades?
Oh, only the last several decades? God, I've been doing weather for over 40 years, and if we count when I was 9 years old, I guess I've been doing weather for, I don't even want to think about how big that number is. No, I would say that the most exciting thing that I've done, God, this is going to be tough, but the most exciting thing that I've done has to be working with the students after weather camp. Because they are focused, they are driven, they're producing stuff. I've gotten several of the weather campers, when they do their research, to actually present at NWA and AMS conferences. And these kids actually presented when they were still high school students, which is very special. And they're still presenting to today. And seeing them grow and be able to do that even at a high school age and help them get there and also shake some hands at the conferences is very rewarding and really makes me feel good. And actually one of my interns who did the research called me today, and he wants to talk about life questions. So I'll see what I can do to help him on his journey forward. I'll keep you posted, okay?
And we're coming up on the, I think we're coming up on the 50-minute mark here. So one last question, and we ask this to everyone who comes on the show. What kind of advice would you give to young meteorologists or young students in school aspiring to become meteorologists?
Never stop learning.
Simple as that.
Simple as that. I will divulge my age as we close. I'm 71. I never stop learning.
Yeah. Great advice there from Mike Mogil here. And thanks so much for taking some time to talk with us. I feel like we could share stories for hours, as we have actually at various conferences and lunches. And so thanks again for joining us. And if you want to get in contact with Mike, we'll put his info on the site. We'll also put a link to the Global Weather and Climate Center. And Mike, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it. And 37 episodes, huh? That's pretty awesome yourselves. Keep it up, and if you ever want me to come back for any reason, don't hesitate. I'll be happy to give you guys some time.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank
We'll
you.
be sure to have you on
All right.
sometime in the future.
All right, well, you guys
And,
take care and enjoy the weather.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
And if you're not following us yet on Twitter, you can follow us at the WX Junkies. We're also on Facebook. You can listen to this podcast on SoundCloud, YouTube, or iTunes. And if you're listening on iTunes, give us a rating or review. We'd really appreciate it. You can find all of our content on our new website, theweatherjunkies.com, and give us a look over there and tell us what you think. Tyler, pitch the next episode. What can we expect from that?
Next week, we are ushering in meteorological fall with multiple guests from Jardine Lloyd Thompson Group. They are in business in New York. They do a lot of interesting things with meteorology, perhaps things that were not done 30 years ago. So we'll talk with them, learn about how they make money, how they stay in business, and why someone may want to join them in what may be an untraditional meteorology route. So again, multiple guests next week from Jardine Lloyd Thompson, and that show will be live on Thursday at 8 o'clock. And for Mike, Dakota, and myself, thank you for joining us on this special Wednesday night episode. We hope you'll join us right back here next week in September.
I am El Nino.